COBA is an archaeological site of the pre-Columbian Mayan culture. It is located in the southeast of Mexico, in the territory that today is the state of Quintana Roo, about 55 miles east of Chichen Itza, and about 25 miles northwest of Tulum. The meaning of COBA could be cob, that which has humidity, or moss, and a, or ha, water. That is to say, water with moss or humidity of water. It probably also means cloudy water, due to the proximity to some small lakes with a very cloudy color. Some other authors and researchers from the National Institute of Anthropology and History propose different translations of the term COBA, such as water of the chachalacas, since cob is the name of that bird in this region, gopher tooth, also from Mayan ko, tooth, and ba, gopher, or abundant water, from cob, abundance, and ha, water. It had a population of about 50,000 inhabitants at its peak and an area of 50 square miles. It was in the middle of the classic period of the Mayan civilization that most of the city was built, between the years 500 and 900 AD, and had several temples. Among them, the Pyramid of Nohochmul survives, which stands at 138 feet high. According to various investigations, COBA has a long history of pre-Hispanic occupation, which began in roughly 200 to 100 BC, when there was a settlement of low platforms and construction of wood and palm, of which there is no more evidence, other than some ceramic fragments. From 100 AD, the area of COBA experienced a remarkable demographic, social, and political growth, which led it to become one of the largest and most powerful cities in the north of the Yucatan Peninsula. It is believed that between 200 and 600 AD, the city of COBA exercised a wild territorial control, which led it to dominate the entire north of the current state of Quintana Roo and even certain portions of eastern Yucatan. This is because COBA had control of large agricultural and hydraulic spaces, as well as inter- and intra-regional exchange routes, which possibly would have included the control of some important ports, such as Xel-Há. It is also believed that at this time, COBA would have maintained close contacts with the large cities of Guatemala and the south of Campeche and Quintana Roo, such as Tikal, Calakmul, Tsibanché, just to mention a few. And to maintain its power, it would have established military and marriage alliances at the highest level. In this sense, it is also worth mentioning the existence of Teotihuacan-type architecture, which would document the existence of links with central Mexico and its powerful early classic metropole, Teotihuacan. After the year 1000 AD, the city lost political importance, although it seemed to have preserved its symbolic and ritual importance that allowed it to recover a certain hierarchy between the years 1200 and 1500, when various buildings were built already within the Eastern Coast style. However, the economic dynamics of these times seem to have been fundamentally centered on coastal sites, which is why COBA would have become a second-order city. At the time of the consolidation of Spanish control of the peninsula, around the years 1550, COBA was completely uninhabited, and it was not until the arrival of John Stevens and Frederick Catherwood in the mid-19th century that the city was mentioned again. The city is structured from architectural groups that have to do with its chronology and its urban function. The COBA group is residential in nature, while others are more of a ceremonial and funerary function, such as the Makanshok group. Within the COBA group, which is the first one you'll find after entering, a magnificent temple of almost 82 feet high belonging to the early classic period and known locally as the Iglesia, the church, is found. It is formed by 9 bodies with rounded corners. The first body of the building cannot be seen since patio A covers it completely. Above it, there are 2 vaulted rooms and a staircase that leads to both sides of it. It has several construction stages that overlap one another. Construction began in the early Classic, which is between 300 and 600 AD, and the last modification was made during the post-Classic. The COBA group, located between COBA and Makanshok lakes, is the oldest in the archaeological area, and it consists of 53 buildings, of which only a few can be visited. At the foot of the church and in front of the staircase is the upper fragment of a stela, surrounded by a small circular altar in front. The carving of the stela is practically raised, with only a few glyphs distinguishable. There is also a complex set of palatial and residential buildings that are an excellent example of the enormous size and importance that the city had in its time. This group is complemented by the juego de pelota, or ball game, where you can see some captive figures from the 600 to 900 AD period, as well as an ornate base with representations of human skulls and some hieroglyphic inscriptions on the stair nosings. It is followed by one of the ball games with the game rings engraved with the symbol of Venus, which is linked to war, sacrifice, and death. There is also an extensive courtyard with elongated buildings, some of which feature some remains of mural paintings. It is well documented that since the 17th century BC, the Olmecs were already playing the ball game, although with some differences in the rules. 2,000 years later, in Teotihuacan, scenes related to the ball game were captured. In the mural known as Tlalocan, it is shown how several people practice the ball game. There are also illustrations of heads without a body and some of other sacrifices associated with the game. One of the ball games found in Chichen Itza has the largest dimensions than any other in Mesoamerica, around 525 feet by 197 feet. The enclosure is formed by two high walls, in the center of which are embedded two stone rings, known as ball game markers, which bear the representations of two intertwined feather serpents, therefore considered portals to the underworld, being that the game involves a deep religious sense. In Nahuatl, it is called Teotatli, or place of the ball game gods. The name given by the Mayans to the ball game was Pok-ta-pok, in reference to the sounds that the ball produced when it bounced off the walls. In COBA, they generally played 3 versus 3. The ball was made of the resin of a tree, and it ended up being like a rubber ball. This ritual was held in the beginning of spring, around March 21st. The ball, being round, represented the sun, so it could not be touched with the hands, but only with the hips, knees, and elbows. It's been said that before starting the game, all the players had to pray to Hunahpu, a god of Mayan mythology who was assassinated, revived, and died again after having lost a Mayan ball game. Members of the losing team are believed to have been sacrificed. Others believe that those who won were the ones that would end up being sacrificed. However, there are doubts about the value system of the Mayans, about whether they consider it valid to speak in terms of loser and winner, since it is known that their beliefs exceeded all natural terrestrial delimitation. And the game was probably considered a representation of what was to come, a means of entering the battle of the sun and the other stars, entering and leaving the world to the underworld. Some claim that after the Mayan ball game, the players were sacrificed. It was not necessarily a rare practice in certain times, where sacrifice was a common part of the most important cultures, since the gods were worshipped practically daily. And it is known that the ball game was made in honor of a god. But was it necessary to make a sacrifice on his behalf? We cannot really affirm or deny this belief, because there is no confirmed data in this regard that allows us to position ourselves one way or the other. It is true that the ball game was not only played with the aim of distracting both the player and the spectator, but it also had enormous symbolic power. The ball game was related to ritual warfare. which means that a battle is taking place between light and darkness, between night and day. Thus, the losing side could be sacrificed, given the cruelty of the confrontation. However, the verifiable data does not tell us exactly whether or not such sacrifices were made in this game. If we take into account that it was a war game, we can understand that the loser was killed by beheading, which was the typical sacrifice then, but we have no evidence of it. Continuing the tour, we find the beginning of the Sakbe, or White Path 1, which no longer looks at all like it did back then. Although the main function of the Sakbes was to connect the empire settlements, these roads also had a spiritual and mythological meaning. They served as pilgrimage routes as a symbol of political and economic power between cities. This system of roads connected the trade of goods between distant cities. The Sakbes were built in stone, with a core filled with large stones and gravel on the surface. The road surface was covered with a layer of white stucco, which was equivalent to the pavement as we know it today. A Sakbe of 62 miles connects COBA with Yashuna. You can also find the Nohochmul group along this Sakbe, where one of the tallest buildings in the entire Mayan area is located. Known precisely by the name of Nohochmul, or Great Mound in Mayan, is an enormous basement of about 100 feet high, on which a temple belonging to a later construction stage is preserved and which ends up being a total of 138 feet high. The Nohochmul was built during the early Classic period, between 200 and 600 AD. Surely due to its political and symbolic importance, various constructive elements were added to the building, the last of which is the temple that is preserved in the upper part of the basement corresponding to the Costa Oriental architectural style, which belongs to the period 1200 to 1550 AD. In the Nohochmul group, there is a construction of even greater volume. It is the Great Platform, a building almost 100 feet high and 360 feet by 410 feet on a side that makes it the basement with the largest volume in the entire northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula. Unfortunately, it has not been explored, but it is very interesting to observe its impressive dimensions that possibly correspond to a work that was never finished, since no remains of any construction have been found in the upper part. In the same set, you can visit Structure X, which is a residential construction whose main interest lies in the fact that it contains Stela 20, which is the best preserved of the site and in which the Mayan date corresponding to November 30th, 730 AD can be read. Very close to this complex is a rather unique structure, recently restored, known as Shaibe, or Crossroads, which is a semicircular building and a staircase grandstand with footprints and slopes much greater than those of the human metric that seems to have functioned as a memorial and crossing of Sakbes 1, 5, 6, and 8. To the southwest of Nohochmul is a group of buildings built during the late post-classic period known as the Group of Paintings, in allusion to some fragments of wall paintings that are preserved inside the small main temple of the group. Its dimensions are very modest compared to the impressive proportion of other buildings on the site. However, this set is relevant for grouping together some of the later constructions of COBA, which were built with the ashlars and construction materials of other older buildings. The last of the groups is the Makanshok, which is made up of a set of low platforms with small temples and altars, most of which are preceded by commemorative stelae of various events related to the life and activities of the rulers of COBA, some of them women. It was until the beginning of the 20th century that most of the archaeological studies of the area were carried out. This due to the difficulty imposed by the jungle to reach the place. In 1972, the National Institute of Anthropology and History began to develop the area and built accesses for researchers and visitors. Currently, its ruins are one of the main tourist attractions in the region.
Este es picante. Sí. Eso no pica, mamita.
¿No toca? Ah,
No,
ok.
esto sí es picante.
Ah, ok, ok.
Sí.
¿Eso es picante?
No es picante precisamente.
Eso está,
If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing and hitting the thumbs up. And if you have any suggestions of any other places to visit in Mexico, please leave it in the comments. Thank you very much.